guys, so today I thought I would talk to you about my favourite fairy tale retellings. So I have a mixture of novels and short story collections in this video. The novels usually retelling one fairy tale or taking inspiration from one famous fairy tale, and the short story collections quite often retelling multiple fairy tales. Also, as opposed to just having loose fairy tale themes, each of these books or collections of short stories can have their fairy tale inspiration clearly identified, just to narrow down the scope a little bit. But without further ado, let's get into the books, shall we? So most of the books in this video retain the magical quality of fairy tales, but the first book I'm actually going to show to you pretty much does away with those, and that is New World Fairy Tales by Cassandra Parkin. There are 6 short stories in this collection, each retelling a specific fairy tale. We have Snow White, Cinderella, The Three Little Pigs, Jack and the Beanstalk, and 2 more which I can't actually remember at the moment, but they're all Grimm's Brothers fairy tales. And they're all framed as if they are interviews with characters from the stories that inspired the fairy tale, only one of which has overtly magical elements to it. But there's always that sense of magic, I feel, with a fairy tale retelling, and these stories are beautifully written. I think these are some of my absolute favourite short stories for their writing. Cassandra Parkin's prose are out of this world, and they blew me away with every sentence in this collection. I zoomed through it. These stories are notably dark, much like their inspiration, the original Grimm's Brothers. And although I usually prefer magical short stories, I have to say that these really go above and beyond any preferences I've ever had for a short story collection, and definitely one of my top recommendations. But next up is another collection of short stories. These, however, all maintain their magical elements and still retain a historical setting like their inspiration. Those are the short stories in Kissing the Witch by Emma Donoghue. Now, what is lovely about these short stories is that each one is linked to the next. A minor character from the story before will then become the major character in the next story. They will often begin the story by saying, well, want to hear how I got here? Let me tell you. And the other wonderful thing about these fairy tale retellings is that they are all about women saving women. So either the women in these stories save themselves, or they are saved by another woman, and very, very many of them have LGBT themes. So if you're looking for LGBTQ plus fairy tales, these are definitely ones to check out, and I just think they are some of the most beautiful retellings of fairy tales I've ever read. I love the relationships between all of these women in these stories. I just thought the romance as well as the fairy tale aspects were beautiful. I just fell in love with these short stories, as I feel the characters fall in love with one another, and I love the way that Emma Donoghue twisted the originals to make these beautiful new creations. But next up, I think I'll mention a novel so that we can get away from the short stories if that's not what you're interested in, and that is Roses by Rose Mannering. Rose actually has a YouTube channel, so I'll link that down below if you're interested, and this is the first in a series of fairy tale retellings. The first one being inspired by, you've guessed it, Beauty and the Beast. Despite taking inspiration from another story, however, Rose creates something all of its own and completely new, I feel. It has that perfect balance of familiarity with the original story still there, but without feeling as if I'm reading something I already know. It felt completely new to me, and what was wonderful about the story is that a lot of it takes place before the characters of Beauty and Beast even meet. So we follow our main character Beauty, who is given that name as a bit of a taunt, as her adopted family don't actually think she is beautiful. She is silvery haired and distinctive looking, much more closely resembling the magic folk, as this is a world where magic and non-magic people are at war, and we follow her growing up and her relationship with the world around her long before she comes in contact with the Beast character. It is also, like I mentioned, the first in a series, the second of which retells another fairy tale retelling, but I haven't read that one yet, and I really do want to, because at the end of this book I needed more. The sequel just wasn't out at that time, and I need to pick it up. My next book is actually a children's book, and that is Revolting Rhymes by Roald Dahl. I don't know if you were expecting to see this one on my favourite fairy tale retellings, but that's essentially what these nonsense poems are. This collection includes Roald Dahl's retelling of Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, and the Three Little Pigs. I first read these when I was a child and was completely enamoured with them. I think they have all of those elements that children love. They are whimsical, they are poetical, they are laugh out loud and gory. What more do children want, really? Roald Dahl has captured the imagination of many children and adults alike, and I think this collection is for all ages. Next up is a pretty famous collection of fairy tale retellings, and that is The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories by Angela Carter. This fairy tale retelling collection actually has a number of short stories that are inspired by the same fairy tales. So there are a couple that are inspired by Red Riding Hood. There was actually a film called The Company of Wolves, which was inspired by some of the short stories in this collection. We also have fairy tales like Puss in Boots, and the title story is a retelling of Bluebeard. If we want to talk about beautiful prose, Angela Carter is famous for her writing. It is truly gorgeous. These again are very dark retellings and very magical and immersive and imaginative. Angela Carter's fairy tale retellings break through any genre boundaries and, you know, really mix it up, I think. And if you are interested in fairy tale retellings, I think this is an absolute must read. It was first published in the 1970s and has since become a classic in itself. But whilst we're on the topic of beautiful prose, I have another novel for you, and that is Boy Snowbird by Helen Oyeyemi. The title might give you a clue to this one, but it is inspired by Snow White. Now, I'd say this is probably the most loosely inspired story in my pile, but it is still very overtly inspired by Snow White. You can pick up on that throughout the novel, and it's actually also set in a more contemporary modern world than a lot of these stories, more like Cassandra Parkin's stories. And like with all of the novels I've read by Helen Oyeyemi, they seem quite realistic, but they have a bit of the magic realism going on there that constantly has you questioning what's going on, or perhaps it's only affecting one of the characters, whereas the rest of the story seems to follow a very realistic storyline. But her prose is also, like I mentioned, stunning, and I think really beautiful, intricate writing almost adds a sense of magic to a piece of writing, if that makes sense. Now, to be completely honest, I wasn't quite sure how I felt about the very end of this story, but I think the rest of it was absolutely wonderful, and I'd still probably recommend it as a book. And lastly, I'd like to mention another children's book, this time a children's picture book, and that is Little Red by Beth Ann Woolven, which is quite obviously a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. It is a children's picture book, so it doesn't veer very far from the original story, and it's not terribly long, but I think it does have a very unique element to it. And I think it's a wonderful version of the original story for young children. And not only that, but the illustrations are beautiful. They, I believe, have won awards, this picture book. I think they are really stunning. Those are all the books I wanted to mention in this video though. Do let me know if you have any favourite fairy tale retellings, or what's your favourite fairy tale, and have you found any retellings of it out there? Are you in search of more? Until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!